Welcome to Wednesday Web Chat. This is Carl Lewis, your host from Vision 33. And today my guests are from Avalara. And we're going to be talking about lots of ways to do your taxes better. And so we've got John, Wendy, and Hector all here today. So I'm going to turn it over to our special guest today from Avalara.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for spending some time with us this morning. We very much appreciate it. I'm John. I'm an alliance manager from Avalara. And we're here to talk about taxes, and we won't make it as horrible as it sounds. Taxes are actually kind of interesting. They've been around for a long time. Taxes helped to build the Great Pyramids. They helped to build the Roman Empire, and they've been an important economic development tool in most society through the ages. In this country now, there's still no escaping tax compliance. Companies must either collect and remit sales tax or prove they're exempt from it. Today, we're going to talk about the specific tax challenges that companies must deal with when trying to comply with the rules. And we'll talk about how Avalara addresses those challenges. You'll see how smart and simple compliance automation can be. I'm excited to have two experts in compliance automation with us today, two people who I rely on almost every day. Joining us is Hector Rittendale, Managing Director at Argenis Consulting. Hector will demonstrate how Avalara works with SAP Business One and by design. And also with us is Wendy Leonard, Senior Product Solutions Engineer. Wendy will demonstrate how Avalara's tax compliance suite works. And a big thanks to Carl from Vision 33. Avalara and Vision 33 have been partnered for I don't know how long, probably over a decade. We have a lot of mutual customers. And we brought the benefits of tax compliance automation to those folks, and we'll be doing so many times down the line. So all that being said, I want to talk about what the challenges are that companies face when they're trying to be compliant to the government. First of all, there's this thing called nexus. What's nexus? Well, that's a company's obligation to a state to collect and remit sales tax to that state. With Avalara, you can add the jurisdictions in just one click. It's a pretty easy process. Then there's product taxability. Some products, some services are taxed one way in a state. So we help handle taxability rules and all the confusion around them. Then there's jurisdiction assignments. Jurisdictions are aplenty across this country. There's over 12,000 of them across this country. How do you know which tax jurisdiction applies and what the tax rate should be within that tax jurisdiction? With Avalara, we can help you find the right jurisdiction and the right tax rate right away. And then, like I said earlier, in this country, you either have to collect and remit sales tax to a state because you have nexus to that state, or you have to prove you're exempt from doing so. In proving that, you have to keep on hand a document that's called an exemption certificate. Those are often overlooked, and it's the first thing that an auditor looks for in an audit. With Avalara, you can manage those exemption certificates automatically, so you're less of an audit risk. We help companies to prepare and file their tax returns, usually on a monthly or quarterly basis. It's often a time-consuming, burdensome process to get all the forms and all the tax payments sent out to all the different tax jurisdictions or be obligated to. And then finally, we help a company to be ready for that audit. When the auditor comes knocking, if he or she walks into the business and sees a system like Avalara in place, that auditor is less likely to hang around. That auditor is looking to gain revenue to the state. And if it sees a company that has their act together compliance-wise, they're more likely to move on down the street and find a company that's not in that same situation. Now, before I hand it over to Hector and Wendy to get into the software itself, I want to emphasize how important it is to know what your tax obligations are. By obligations, I mean that thing called nexus, or where you're obligated to collect and remit sales tax to. Well, first of all, you need to know how nexus is determined. What gets you on the hook to be obligated to a state? Well, nexus is triggered by how much revenue a company sells into each state. And that includes both taxable as well as tax-exempt sales. Now, many manufacturers and distributors, I bet a good portion of this audience is made up of manufacturers or distributors. Many of you folks sell tax-exempt. There's a common misconception out there that because you sell tax-exempt, that you don't have nexus. But that's often not true. Here's a map that shows which states account exempt sales towards their nexus thresholds. In other words, when you're about to trigger nexus in a state, you want to look at whether the state counts tax-exempt sales as well as taxable sales. You can see by all the orange color, most states count exempt sales when considering whether you're going to be obligated or have nexus with the state. Something to be aware of. In fact, most companies don't realize the extent of their compliance risk. When we provide a nexus analysis to a company, we usually find 4 to 6 times the number of nexus states that the client originally thought they had. 4 to 6 times the obligation, 4 to 6 times the nexus. This is an oh my gosh moment for a lot of CFOs and controllers. It's eye-opening what we find out there. 4 to 6 times more states that the company has to be obligated to. So I can't stress enough the importance of knowing your nexus to accurately comply with tax laws. Here's a success story that highlights what I'm talking about. A manufacturer discovered a lot more liability than what they originally had. Before the assessment, the manufacturer was registered in only one state. They were selling nationwide and recently took on an enrollment in Amazon FBA because of what we went through with the pandemic, and they didn't have the foot traffic that they used to have in their stores. So they beefed up their online presence and also enrolled in Amazon. But they were still handling compliance manually. Now we see this profile every day in and day out. After the Nexus assessment, we discovered that they had Nexus in not just one state, they had it in 23 states. Again, this is what we commonly find, this kind of result. So we helped them. We came through with a number of different services. We helped them register in these new states. We helped them with back filing to be compliant in the new states. And VDAs, or voluntary disclosure agreements, were used to help the company get through their exposure that they had to a lot of states. With a VDA, we would go in and we would represent the company and negotiate that exposure down in return for the company being known and registered to the state. And we did some back filing as well. They actually owned $250,000 in back taxes. Again, we see this every day, day in and day out. So as a result of getting their compliance ship straightened out, everything organized, they purchased our AvaTax and returns products so they wouldn't have to face this situation again, so that they could automate the process. So all that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Hector now. Hector is a managing director at Argentis Consulting, and we work closely with Argentis, worked closely for a long time. And Argentis built the integration between SAP Business One and by Design and Avalara. So I'm sure you'd like to see what that integration looks like and how it works. So Hector, take it away, please.
Hi, everyone. I just shared my screen, so you should see SAP Business One at this stage. So I will go straight to create a sales document. AvaTax works on all sales documents. So let me walk you through how to create a sales orders, and from the sales orders, we can go to an invoice. So let me select customer. Now, when you create a customer in in AvaTax is very important addresses, as Sean mentioned. So you can create and validate all of the addresses that you create, especially the ship to. So let me give an example. we have here an address customers in New York. So for example, let me delete the zip code. I will validate the address. So you can see the address was fully validated by Avatax. Avatax uses the USPS database. So I can even delete the city. Yes, and I will try to match the addresses. Okay, so that's basically how you validate an address at the customer level. Once you select the customer in the sales document, you can also validate at the ship to. You can create a new one, you can select existing one. Yes, again, same process. Yes, so I can delete the city here, but I can add a new one and I can validate it. Okay, before selecting items or services, since we are talking about addresses, yes, in Avatax, we have the bulk address validator, which basically is going to validate all of the addresses in the systems. Yes, for this demonstration, I will select ship to addresses, which are the addresses that we need to focus. I will select the customers. I can load all of the customers' addresses, ship tos. Yes, I can check all and validate it, or I can select any of the addresses. For this demo, I will select these two. I can click on validate. And if the address is fully validated, it's going to update the record at the business partner as well. So once all the addresses are fully validated in the system, you can go ahead and start to create sales documents. So I will select, I don't know, 3 items. I can do here, let's put here 3. Yeah, so you have a unit price, you have a total. So if I click add, it will calculate tax. If you want to see the tax before adding the document, you can always click on preview tax or calculate tax. Yeah. So in here you have the total taxable amount, the total exempt, and the calculated tax. Now, why calculated tax on this particular transaction is because this particular customer is not exempt, doesn't have a valid exempt certificate. It also has nexus in New York. Yes, something that Sean mentioned before. So it brought taxes based on the origin address. The origin address comes from the warehouse. The destination address is coming from the ship to at the logistic tab. Yes, so it calculated tax. So when I added this sales order, so let me select the delivery date. So the sales order will be created in SAP with the tax information. Okay, so I can go back. I can see the tax was added. From here, I can copy to a delivery. I can copy to an invoice. To make the process shorter, I will select an invoice. Yes, and I will add again. You can preview, you can add it. I will add it. Yeah. For this, we are using draft first to make sure that before the transaction is posted, you are aware of everything. But it could also be created directly in SAP and Avatax. So here you have the draft, so you can see the tax has been calculated again, and you can add the invoice. Now, when the invoice is created in SAP, it's not only created in SAP, but also posted into Avatax. Sorry, let me go back to the one. So this transaction has been fully posted, created in SAP, and it has also been posted in Avatax. Before showing you how the transaction ended up in Avatax, let me explain other functionality that are very useful. Obviously, I just show you how to create one invoice, but you can also use the document generation wizard, which basically works the same as in SAP standard. There are some extra functionality for Avatax, but basically here you select what the target document is going to be. So you can select here invoices. There are some features like consolidating by business partner. Yes, you can select base document. So there are some functionalities added for SAP, but basically for Avatax. But basically the functionality is pretty much similar to the SAP standard one. So you select a base document, so you can select, for example, sales orders, you can find document, yes, you can select these two, yes, or the three, yeah, and eventually when you finish, it's going to create, or it's gonna convert those sales orders into invoices, and again, they will be created in SAP, and they will be posted in Avatax as final invoices. We also have a utility to schedule this, so you can automate this process. You don't have to run the wizard manually. You can actually schedule to run it every day, every 5 minutes, every week. It's up to you how often you want to run the scheduler to create documents. There is another very important tool, which is reconcile SAP documents. So basically, it will, let me check invoices from May the 1st to the date. Yes, I can load all of the documents. Right now, we are bringing the invoices and credit memos. Now, this tool basically is going to check if this document already exists in Avatax. By default, they should be, but perhaps you migrated invoices or credit memo from a different systems. For example, it could be from DTW, or it could be from e-commerce, from a point of sales, and they need to be posted in Avatax. So I can check all, for instance. I can search for posted documents. So basically what it's doing right now is checking if the document exists in Avatax. If it doesn't exist, it will tell you that the document, it was not found. So you do have the option to post selected documents. Yes, I have in my demo environment, all of the documents already exist. So, but in case that you find not found here in the second column, you can actually select a particular document and you can post the selected document. So it's gonna create the document in Avatax. So you need to make sure that all of the invoices and credit memos are fully posted before Avalara will remit taxes to each jurisdictions. Okay, and I told you I was going to show you how. I know that perhaps Wendy's gonna go deeper on this, but let me quickly show you the transaction that we created. So I will go to pay date. This is your Avatax portal. So let me. So here you have some transactions posted on today's date. Yes. So you can drill down. Yes, you have the items. Yes, that's the default address at the header. But if we drill down, you can see that tax code, something that Sean briefly mentioned about product taxability. This particular item has a different tax code, so it's treated as such. And you can see the fully discriminated information for state, city, and any special tax on each of the documents. So each of the document has a ship from, ship to. Yes, if you have nexus in the States, if the customer is taxable, and if the product is taxable. Okay, so that's basically how the documents are fully posted automatically from SAP to Avatax. So Wendy, I think I need to send it to you.
Sure, absolutely. Unless you wanted to cover real quickly, I'm going to cover the exemption piece of it. But if you'll just kind of point out the utility also for that, I'll be referring back to it as well.
Okay,
so
that's fine. No worries. I can cover that. In our solution, is also fully integrated with Cert capture. Cert capture is a solution that Avalara provides to keep your exempt customers and allows you to upload a valid exempt certificate. So when you are in SAP and you want to migrate exempt customers, you can select the Cert capture functionality for it. And in here, you have the option to uniquely identify the exempt customers. So you can actually if, I don't know, if you have your exempt customers in SAP as tax liable exempt, you can use that. If you have any business property, yes, or if you have any remarks in here, we can actually come up with some special characters to retrieve those exempt customers. So I can load the customers. Yes, and if I want to upload one of the customers in Cert Capture, I can select it and can create it and update it in Cert Capture. Let me see if it's already connected. So basically what I just did, I uploaded that customer in Cert Capture. Now, is this customer exempt in Cert Capture? No, it's not yet, because I need to go to Cert Capture and upload a valid exempt certificate for that particular customer. Now, do I have to use Cert Capture for exempt customers? It's usually recommended. However, you can obviously use the SAP. Yes, you can make a customer exempt, you can make a product exempt. So that's an option that you also have in SAP. So if you go to settings, which I will not go too deep on this. So settings. Yes, I have here extension mode, who is responsible for making the customer exempt, Avalara Tax or SAP. Right now, which usually is the recommended way to deal with Avalara Tax.
All right.
So,
Thank you, Hector.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Oh, I appreciate you being here. Thank you. So one of the things that I'm going to do is kind of assimilate the pieces that we just heard John talk us through and Hector talk us through and talk about those different pieces, right? So the key takeaway here is that there'll be some parts in your implementation process. You'll get an Avatax Avalara console site, as we just saw. We're going to look a little bit deeper in it as well. And then you'll also have a piece of it that's going to be in your environment in SAP. And the key is that it works in real time. And I also want to point out that, and Hector mentioned it as well, you might have an ERP, you might have a CRM, you might have, excuse me, not an ERP, an e-commerce site, right? So you might have multiple places that you're looking for tax, either on quotes or on shopping carts and things like that. And Avalara Avatax is really designed to have all of those places point in and make the same tax decision. So your e-commerce, your shopping carts will have the same tax decision as SAP would have on those data elements. If you out of a CRM, that call in and make sure it would know exactly tax your quote will actually end up having, that your sales order would have, that your final invoice would have. And the key is that these are real-time decisions that Avalara Avatax is making behind the scenes. As we get a new system that we bring on board, there's a whole process. They will support you in that process of adding the integration. So you get that real-time integration, but once it's there, it's really that you're working and your customers and your employees are working in the system that they would normally work in. So your vast majority of your clients, your users will just use SAP exactly like Hector was showing you. You'll invoice just like you normally do. You don't have to do these extra steps within Avatax, no extra steps to make the tax decisions. So what we've got are a bunch of transactions that have come through from the various source places. John mentioned Nexus being so important. So inside of Avatax, that's where you'll identify under this where you collect tax. That's your Nexus setting. So that's where you've registered for tax within any of the different jurisdictions, state level, maybe a local level, and a couple of the states that require that. And you'll just identify in one place in Avatax where your registrations are. And then whatever source systems are calling in, it knows that and it uses that as a tax decision. You'll always see also on your front page, if you've got a map highlighted here in Avatax, then that means that you're approaching a nexus threshold specifically for economic nexus. Now, there's other reasons you might have hit a nexus trigger, and that might be that you've got remote employees or any employees in the state. If you've got inventory that's stored in their state, if you've got a rental property and a lease and things like that, those are your good old-fashioned reasons for nexus. But a couple years ago, as John was kind of talking about, these new economic nexus laws. So just the fact that you do business within a state, if you do enough business within that state, the states have written laws that say, and the Supreme Court upheld it, that that is enough to compel you as a company to register. And so since we, Tax, understand, the engine understands your total transactions that you have, we're also able to compare it to tax law. So if you have any states highlighted when you come into Tax, it's either going to be yellow, which means you're approaching an economic nexus threshold. So in this case, it's 94%. So approaching is somewhere between 80 and 100% of that threshold. We're going to let you know the percentage, the period that for which you hit that. And those thresholds are generally going to be dollar amount of your sales or volume of your sales. And we're going to let you know which it is. In this case, it's sales. It's this dollar amount of the sale. As you move to actually hitting that threshold, we're going to highlight it darker in orange and let you know, again, percentage. In this case, Iowa is 566%. So it's, as everything else with Nexus, your decision for your business about whether you're going to register for that state. If you're super exceeding these, we strongly recommend you do that registration. You decide you're going to register, but there might be reasons that you decide not to. We're going to let you make that decision. If you would like Avalara, to register for you in-app, you can start the process, and we've got a process that we will then work with the jurisdictions and do that registration process for you. Or if you see that you've hit a registration or you're approaching and you'd like to register yourself, you absolutely could do that as well. This is informational to give you all of the information that you have to make your business decisions. Again, want to point out that a lot of my manufacturers and distributors feel like this economic nexus doesn't super apply to them because so much of their sales is not non-taxable, exemption driven, or drop shipments on behalf of their customers. And just as a reminder, most states don't care. Anytime you're shipping into their state, whether to your customer directly or drop shipping on your customer's behalf, counts as a transaction, whether it's non-taxable or taxable. Generally, most states say it counts as a transaction. It goes towards that sales threshold and that volume threshold. So that's always there and able to give you the direction on that for you guys to use. All right. The other thing, and just to kind of recap, yes, I am still here. Recap what Hector was going over. We're making a tax decision in real time. The integration into the system is telling us when they're finalized posted invoices. Avalara calls that committed, and that lets us know this is something we're going to move over for the remittance process. It also is looking to see, as was pointed out, all of the pieces of making a tax decision. So, what's the code that's being used, all of those various different elements. I think it does want me to log back in. So all of the various different elements for what decision, what tax is applied on here. And that tax is applied for all of the various decisions around do you have Nexus here? Is your customer tax exempt? Do you have, what is the product that you're selling? And then what the sourcing rules, and then what the jurisdictions are, all of those different elements. And yes, still here on these two. So you can see in this case, this is a customer that has a certificate, and it says straight up, yes, there's a certificate. There's no tax on this. We can see the breakdown of the different elements, and we can see in this case exactly the certificate that's involved in that. So again, from your SAP environment, you can identify your customers that are exempt. You can kick off a process. And when there is a transaction that includes a tax exempt sale, it not only says that, yes, did you have Nexus here? Yes, you did. Was this customer exempt? No, they were not, because they had a certificate on file. And then certainly it's always going to look at what it was. This is a code. Again, to recap, a goods and services code within Avalara. That's a proprietary code that just tells us what the item is, so that we can see for this jurisdiction, for the addresses involved, is that product or service taxable in and of itself. Remember, you don't even get to that point if you don't have Nexus. Avatax makes a tax decision. Zero tax compares it to the thresholds. If you do have Nexus, it looks to see, hey, do you have a certificate for your customer? If you do, zero tax and returns it and records it and embeds that in there so you know. And then if the next one, if you do have Nexus, you don't have a certificate, it looks to see, is this good or service even taxable? looking to see what it is, gives you lots of information around how to track those different pieces. Okay, so bouncing over just really quickly around your exemptions and your exempt customers, you're able to identify various different pieces in what you have. Do you have anything that's come in recently that wasn't valid? What certificates do you have that are new? As well as a process to get updated certificates from your customers. So we can look to see a customer, and this is a customer, the details have been pushed through from SAP. We pushed it through, we know the customer details. And in this case, we can see we have a Texas certificate, but we're expecting a California certificate and we don't have one. And we can identify whether we've sent request. In this case, we have. We can come in and see the exact request that was sent and the exact letter that we sent our customer that we can pull up. And we can see exactly what we said to our customer with the logo, with all of the different pieces, and we asked them to go online. So your customer can receive this communication from you. If they've indicated they're tax exempt, and they can go online and submit a certificate. Now they can also email that to you. They can also give it to you as a part of a credit app. They can do lots of different ways. They're not required to use this process, but it is here and available for your customers to submit. So they can add any state that they want to. So if they're like, yep, I'm going to be exempt in California because I have an exemption certificate there. We'd identify the reason. In this case, it's a resale scenario. And they can identify, you can list what it is, the types of things that you sell, and they can identify exactly what would be exempt for their transaction. And here's where your employees don't need to know the viable exemption for California for resale. Your users don't need to know. They'll just come in, complete some of these pieces. If there's any that aren't completed, the system's going to remind them, you need to have this data point in order to accurately complete this certificate. All certificates have different required fields and the system knows those. So the system knows this is a 230 and knows that it's going to be, whatever the elements are. So it was consumables. And now, since I've completed this, me, customer, can move on. And I'm going to submit my certificate. Oh, spelling correctly and signing. So I, customer, am just using the regular browser that I linked to for my computer. As I got my, my letter, it had a link and I linked right over to that, and no extra hardware, no extra software, anything like that needed. So it really kind of closes that loop. Now, this certificate has a document ID right here, and that's ID in the Avalara Tax transactional details. So it really does kind of everything for your customer, for your end user, all built into your SAP environment to kind of kick that whole process off. Yes. All right, so it's going to make me log in again. So I'm going to do that. Sorry, I moved over to the other system. Just following up on the returns piece of it. So we've got, our return. So the transactions are all in the system. Just like when you came on board, you added your nexus settings. You're also going to say for the states that I'm in, those nexus states, you're going to add your returns. So there's a process during implementation to add the returns that you're currently filing with the periods and things like that. Now, it's defaulted to the previous month. So this is May due June because we're in June. And it's going to let you know, here's your total that's due across all jurisdictions that we're filing for you. Nothing else that you needed to do other than the implementation of tell us your returns, set up the integration. So in real time, we're making tax decisions for you. And now we have all the information we need as the month rolls over to let you know for this filing cycle, you have 25 returns due. You're accruing for future returns. So some returns that you're responsible for in this demo system, you've got on a quarterly basis or a semi-annual or annual basis. We know all of that and we're accruing the data. We know that you have nothing due for that month or that month for that jurisdiction. We know you had sales and we're accruing that for the future liability that you're going to have. You're keeping all cash and we're letting you do what's due absolutely this month at exactly right timing. So the end of the 10th of every month and then we'll pull that just like outsourcing for your payroll. So we'll pull a treasury event and then we'll actually work to remit that. And so we do all that legwork. It is an outsourced service so that we will work with the jurisdictions. We will file returns. We do guarantee it's timely, that full loop, and you're always able to come in and see returns that were filed, details of it, confirmations of it, everything to fulfill all of those different pieces of the liability. So we can start with the calculations inside of your SAP environment, working with customers and automating that piece of it on the exemption side, kicking that off from your SAP environment. SAP also has that reconciliation piece to make sure that Avatax is completely in sync that we just saw, and then we can literally kind of file everything for you with that guarantee of timeliness on there. So it's really from the start of the process to the stop end of the process, with the nexus that John was talking about being that key piece up front of just understanding where your liability is. You're responsible for understanding your piece of people, places, things nexus, and we help support you in app with where you have that economic nexus. And then of course we have other support for the services around all of those different pieces. But those are the automating pieces and how it ties into the environment that you're in every day, which is your SAP, and possibly tying into any other pieces, your CRMs, your e-commerce and things like that as might be needed.
Thank you, Wendy. Hey, a couple of questions for you guys. One that comes to mind is let's say a customer has SAP Business One and an e-commerce site. How long will a typical deployment of Avalara take them?
So it all just depends on how complex their tax scenario is. So if they're in a lot of states, if they're in a few states, if they have a large product set, if they have a lot of exempt customers. So that typically is more of the timeline and how many applications are tying in. So if it's going to be just SAP, if it's going to be SAP and in e-commerce, it might take a little bit longer. John, do we have a standard, an average of implementation time? I think we're typically at 6 weeks. I'm not sure.
Okay, I mean that's reasonable.
Okay.
A lot of detail that goes into this. So, but certainly a huge peace of mind knowing that you're doing it correctly all the time. So you said you wouldn't want to discover that you thought you were only necessary to file in one state and ended up with 23 you needed to file in. So
right.
Yeah.
And we've talked with clients that no matter how great you're doing the states, like you can be perfectly compliant in 5 states, but if it turns out you have actually an obligation in 2, 3, 4 more states, then you're only half compliant, right? So it's not just being good in the states that you completely understand, but it's making sure that you have a true picture of what your responsibility as a taxpayer across all of the jurisdictions is.
I think, John, you mentioned that you have the ability to do an audit, so that you can come in and audit a company and see if they really are filing in all the states that's necessary.
Yeah, that's I think you're referring to the nexus analysis that I mentioned, and there's several flavors of that depending on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. There's a free economic nexus tool on our website. Where if you just want to look at the economic nexus portion of it, you can. Economic nexus would be the nexus is triggered by how much revenue and how many sales you have in each state. But there's other triggers for nexus. There's, of course, physical property nexus trigger, which if you have products, people, or buildings in a state, you'll trigger nexus there. There's all sorts of things that can trigger your company to have an obligation sales tax wise to a state. So depending on how thorough you want to go, we can provide the appropriate analysis. You can also go to your CPA as well as another option for that. Might be a little bit more expensive, but if you trust your CPA, you're used to working with them, then that's another option. The main goal is knowing where your obligations are coming from, and then making your decisions as to where you want to register from that point.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, thanks to all 3 of you for the presentation today. This was really informative. We talk with Avalara a lot, but we don't really look deeply into Avatax, the system, very often. So this was really a great demonstration to kind of give people an idea of what is it really, right, that we're looking at. So I think this was super. And thanks so much. And thanks to everyone else for joining us today on Wednesday Web Chat. And we hope all of you will be back for another episode in the weeks ahead.